Some tragedies are born from monstrous forces or malevolent intent. Others, the most haunting ones, are born from the silence of a switch that wasn't thrown, a procedure that was rushed, a warning that went unheeded. The collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge is a chilling tale for the modern age. A story where the smallest of human errors was magnified by colossal engineering and complex global systems into a catastrophe that stopped a nation in its tracks. It reveals the fragile house of cards upon which our daily lives are built, reminding us that in an interconnected world, a single, silent mistake can echo with the force of an earthquake. Let us know where you are watching from and what time you found this video. Not only did the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, but it was also consumed by the water. The famous steel truss structure, which had been a mainstay of Baltimore's skyline since 1977, disappeared into the freezing, churning waters of the Patapsco River in a matter of seconds on the pitch-black canvas of the pre-dawn hours of March 26th. The impact was not only a sound, rather, it was a profound, mechanical moan that ripped through the silence. A death rattle that was felt in the chests of people who were traveling several miles away. The films, which were captured on shaky phones from faraway places, were seen by people all around the globe in a state of astonished astonishment. Despite the fact that it was a scene from a big catastrophe movie, it was horrifyingly and permanently true. Dali, a massive cargo ship that was loaded with approximately 4,700 containers and was a leviathan that was about to embark on the lengthy journey to Sri Lanka, was the agent of this disaster. At 12:45 in the morning, there had been a picture of departure that was in such order. However, around 33 minutes later, when it was getting closer to the main span of the bridge, the organized lights that were on its decks started to dance in an unpredictable manner. They then became completely dark. This was the first cry that was heard in silence, a total and unexplainable breakdown in electricity. It wasn't simply a ship drifting aimlessly, it was a dead bullet that weighed 1 billion pounds and was floating in a current. From the perspective of the panicked pilots on the bridge, the world reduced to the vision through the windshield. The towering support pylon, which had grown from a speck to a monolith with alarming speed. They were able to radio a mayday, which is a frantic yell into the night, which gave the authorities just enough time to halt traffic onto the bridge. This was their last courageous gesture. The 6 souls that were already there, maintenance workers patching potholes, were hung in the air one moment and fell into the abyss the next. They were able to rescue countless lives, but they were unable to save the 6 souls who were already there. A battering ram had the effect of striking the concrete support with the bow of the dolly. Once upon a time, the bridge, which had been constructed at a time when vessels were smaller and moved more slowly, trembled as if it were a giant aware of its own impending death. The whole middle bridge then twisted, buckled, and fell into the river, throwing up a plume of water and debris that seemed to be an explosion caused by a depth charge. This occurred in a disastrous dance of failing physics. The tale that unfolded right away was one of both sorrow and bravery. A citywide vigil was held in order to hunt for the 6 guys who had gone missing and were now thought dead. The first estimates of insured losses, which ranged from a chilly $2 billion to $4 billion, were a direct response to the economic blow. However, it was the inquiry, the patient and methodical unraveling of the why, that would leave the whole globe completely dumbfounded. It turned out that the reality was not a single mistake, but rather a perfect storm of everyday and contemporary errors. A series of incidents that were so odd that they seemed to be made up. During the investigation, the voyage data recorder, often known as the black box, was found by the National Transportation Safety Board, NT. It portrayed a sequence of events that was eerily accurate. The power outage was complete and occurred many times. The backup generators had begun operating, but not before essential systems, like as the thrusters that were required for steering, had been inoperable for a few crucial seconds. A catastrophic voltage drop from the spacecraft's internal electrical grid seemed to be the original source of the problem with the ship. But why is that? The electrical paths were traced by the investigators in the same manner that detectives would pursue a clue. They tracked it back to an occurrence that seemed to be of little significance only a few hours before departure. It had been determined that the ship's emergency generators had been subjected to a regular test, an essential safety feature. A circuit breaker that is often referred to as a reverse power relay was purposefully disabled during this test. This was a regular operation, but it was a hazardous one, since it was done to prevent the test from repeatedly turning off the generator. One of the errors that was made was that it was never turned back on. The ship's electrical system became susceptible as a result of this condition, much like a fortress with its gate left open. It was then that the load on the generators of the Dolly rose as it departed from the harbor. A request for more power for the journey was made by the crew, who may have been unaware that the relay was still disabled. As a result of the system being under pressure, it failed. The voltage loss spread throughout the ship, like a cascade. In order to safeguard themselves, the refrigerated containers, also known as refers, all turned off at the same time. This resulted in a significant surge of electricity when all of the containers attempted to restart at the same time. This spike was the last spike that proved to be lethal. Because it was deactivated, the safety relay was unable to isolate the problem. Everything on the grid went down. The engines came to a close. As the lights went out, the steering wheel became ice cold. The world was taken aback, not by malicious intent, but by the unremarkable. The catastrophe was brought on by a switch that had been forgotten. A procedural mistake that was so insignificant that it was nearly indistinguishable. This oversight was exacerbated by the very complex and linked systems of a contemporary megaship. There was a butterfly effect that had a potentially catastrophic impact. It was shown that our most complex machines, which are these cities at sea, function on the brink of procedural perfection, and that a single error of human proportions might now bring down a monument worth $1 billion and cost the lives of 6 people. The horrible catastrophe that occurred when the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed became more than just an accident. It turned into a cautionary story that was told all over the globe, serving as a sharp warning that in our highly computerized and technologically sophisticated society, even the tiniest human action, or inaction, still has the potential to unravel everything. The collapse of the bridge was not the result of a plot, but rather of a click that was not heard by anybody. This quiet was the most deafening sound of all the sounds that were heard. The world anticipated a straightforward narrative, such as a catastrophic mistake, a technical malfunction, or a bizarre accident. Nevertheless, when the study proceeded to peel back the layers, it discovered that there was not a single point of failure, but rather a hall of mirrors showing systemic fractures in our widespread infrastructure. The investigation, which was directed by NTSB investigator in charge Mark Thurston, evolved into a worldwide autopsy. Divers risked the murky water that was littered with debris, not only for the sake of recovery but also for the purpose of gathering evidence. They discovered the collapsed bridge, which was a horrible sculpture made of twisted steel and concrete. Nestled inside it, like a parasite that had murdered its host, was the Dolly's bow, which was a permanent testament to the collision. In and of itself, the ship was a ghost town full with clues. The notorious circuit breaker was the primary focus of Thurston's crew when they were in the engine room. During the test, it was verified by the maintenance log that it had been switched off. However, they discovered a second entry that was much more unsettling. After receiving approval from a junior engineer, the operation to re-engage it was carried out. But why wasn't it turned on? Not in a guidebook, but in the field of human psychology, was the solution discovered. As a result of conducting interviews with the frightened and fatigued crew, a picture developed of unrelenting pressure. There was a delay in the Dolly deadline. An hour spent in port resulted in a loss of income. There had been a hurry to complete the pre-departure checklist. Out of the hundreds of items included in the binder, the re-engagement of the relay was a single line item. Because of the frenzied effort to get rid of it, it was probably ignored and signed off on without a physical verification, which is referred to as a pencil whip in the business. A commonplace adversary known as haste had been successful in defeating the very redundancy that had been created to rescue them. On the other hand, the examination did not end at the rail of the ship. Over the course of oceans, it extended. A Singapore-based holding company owned the Dolly, which was chartered by a Danish logistics behemoth and managed by a Greek management business. The Dolly was also registered in Denmark. There were Indians on board. London is where the insurance policy was drafted. The vessel was a vessel of great physical strength that was controlled by a dispersed, multinational network of organizations, all of which were able to point the finger at another. It was a perfect picture of current globalization. The intricacy of the situation resulted in a moral and legal void. Who was at fault in the first place? Could it be that the third engineer, who was exhausted, failed to notice the switch? Would you recommend the Greek management firm for its culture of safety? As a result of its scheduling requirements, the charter company, it is the responsibility of the Port Authority to have more stringent verification standards. During this time, the human and economic destruction that had been occurring in Baltimore continued to unfold. There was more to the collapse than simply a tragedy. It was also a blow to the economy. As a result, the Port of Baltimore, which is among the busiest ports in the country, was practically shut down. The obstruction of a crucial artery for American business, which handled everything from automobiles and agricultural equipment to sugar and coal, was a significant setback. Longshoremen, truck drivers, and warehouse workers were in the thousands, and they were all left idle indefinitely. The shock waves from the supply chain started to spread outward, posing a danger to auto manufacturers in the Midwest as well as farmers in the Midwest. A father of 3 who liked to fish in the exact river that took his life, a young immigrant who was sending money home to Guatemala, and a welder who was renowned for his unfailing optimism, were among the 6 victims who later became adored characters. The bridge went from being a piece of infrastructure to being a communal grave, a site of pilgrimage and suffering as a result of their respective tailings. The preliminary conclusions of the National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB) sent an earthquake through the engineering and marine communities, but the full study would take more than a year to complete. It came to the conclusion that the bridge, which was designed in the 1970s, just did not have a chance against a vessel that was 100,000 tons in weight and was built in the 2020s. The defensive dolphins, which were concrete structures designed to deflect hits, were hilariously insufficient for a ship of the Dali's size. They were designed with the past in mind. The shocking reality that was brought to light was that while we have reached an era of giants, we are still safeguarded by the precautions that were in place at an earlier period. Although the ships have seen exponential growth, the rules, infrastructure, and human procedures have not been able to keep up with this growth. A glimpse was provided by the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. It was not an isolated incident. There was a malfunction that occurred throughout the whole system, where a single, little human mistake was magnified by enormous forces and antiquated protections, which ultimately led to disastrous and permanent repercussions. After coming to the realization that this was not a unique tragedy, the whole globe was rendered speechless. It was a message from the future that warned us that our systems are more vulnerable than we realize, and it was written in steel, concrete, and water. It was a warning. Additionally, the next bridge, the next port, and the next ship may be anticipating its very own perfect storm ahead of them.